Hey, everyone, and welcome to a deep dive into this fascinating concept of being in the world, but not of the world.
Yeah, it's a really intriguing idea.
It is, and we're going to be taking a look at an article from the Spiritual Seek that really digs into this whole thing, from a mystical and spiritual perspective,
Right.
and uses the teachings of Jesus as kind of a lens to look at it through. So.
Yeah, you'll see how it ties into all sorts of different ideas from like Plato to Eastern philosophies. It's really about finding that balance,
Yeah.
between engaging with the world around us and kind of maintaining that sense of inner peace and purpose.
Yeah, absolutely. And the article kicks off with this quote from the Gospel of John. It really kind of sets the stage for the whole discussion.
Okay.
Jesus says to his disciples, if the world hates you, keep in mind that it hated me first.
Yeah.
As it is, you do not belong to the world, but I have chosen you out of the world.
Mm-hmm.
It's a very powerful image, this idea of the world hating Jesus and his followers.
Yeah.
What do you think is the deeper meaning behind that?
Well, to really understand it, you have to look beyond just the literal interpretation. When Jesus talks about the world, he's not just referring to the planet Earth,
Right.
He's talking about a whole system of values, a way of thinking that's driven by material desires and fear.
Fear.
And that constant pull of duality.
You mean like those binary oppositions
Yeah.
we get caught up in, right, like good versus evil, right versus wrong.
Exactly. It's that mindset that keeps us trapped in this cycle of striving and attachment.
Yeah.
Jesus was calling for something different, a shift in consciousness that moves beyond those limiting dualities.
So this hatred that he's talking about,
Yeah.
it's more about a fundamental clash of values then.
Yeah, precisely. People who were just totally entrenched in the world system just couldn't grasp the spiritual depth of what he was saying.
Right.
And his teachings challenged their whole worldview,
Yeah.
their attachment to material possessions and social status.
Right. Yeah, it makes sense that they would see him as a threat then.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's really fascinating when you think about it that way.
Yeah.
And it makes you wonder if that same dynamic is still playing out today.
Yeah.
Do we still see this clash between that very materialistic worldview
Oh, totally.
and a more spiritual way of being?
Absolutely. And the article uses a really interesting parallel with Plato's allegory of the cave.
Oh, wow.
You remember that? The prisoner who escapes and sees the world illuminated by the sun.
Mm.
And when he goes back to the cave and tries to describe this true reality he's experienced,
Yeah.
the other prisoners who have only ever known the shadows on the cave wall reject him.
Wow.
They ridicule him.
They can't even comprehend it.
They can't comprehend it because it challenges everything they believe.
Yeah, that is a powerful analogy.
Yeah.
It makes you think about, how often are we clinging to our own shadows without even realizing it?
Right, and it's such a common human experience.
It is.
But the article suggests that there's a way to actually break free from those limitations, to actually step out of the cave and into this more expansive way of seeing ourselves and the world.
So how do we do that then?
Yeah.
I mean, how do we start to bridge that gap?
Yeah.
We need to be in the world. We need to function in society.
Right.
But we're also being called to kind of transcend those limitations.
Yeah, the article offers some really interesting insights from various philosophical and spiritual traditions, and what's striking is how they kind of converge on this idea of detachment as a key to navigating this complex material world without being totally consumed by it.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Because isn't that a little bit of a paradox?
Uh.
How can we be engaged with the world and detached from it at the same time?
It's not about withdrawing from life or becoming indifferent to the world around us. It's more about kind of shifting our perspective, and recognizing that our true essence isn't defined by our possessions or our achievements.
Right.
Or even our thoughts and emotions.
So it's more about being able to observe those things without getting completely swept away by them.
Exactly. It's about cultivating this sense of inner peace and stability.
Yeah.
That isn't dependent on external circumstances. And the article actually uses examples from Eastern philosophy, specifically the teachings of Buddha.
Oh, wow.
To illustrate this point.
That's interesting because I know a little bit about Buddhism, but I'd love to hear more about how it connects to this idea of being in the world but not of it.
Yeah, well, Buddha's teachings emphasize the concepts of suffering, non-self, and impermanence.
Okay.
And he recognized that clinging to things, to our desires and attachments is actually the root of suffering.
Okay.
And so by understanding the impermanent nature of everything,
Yeah.
including our own sense of self,
Yeah.
we can begin to detach from that clinging and find true liberation.
So it's about letting go of the illusion of control
Yeah.
and accepting that everything is constantly changing.
Precisely. And that acceptance, that detachment from the outcome,
Yeah.
is what allows us to engage with the world in a more mindful and compassionate way.
Okay.
We can act with more clarity and wisdom, unburdened by the weight of our attachments.
This is making me think about, the idea of false prophets that Jesus warned about.
Mm-hmm.
Because if we're trying to find that balance,
Yeah.
Between being in the world, being of the Spirit,
Yeah.
how can we tell who's offering genuine guidance
Right.
and who's just leading us down a path of more attachment and suffering?
That's a crucial question.
Yeah.
And the article suggests that true spiritual guidance, whether it comes from Jesus or Buddha or any other wise teacher, will always point us back to our own inner wisdom.
Okay.
It'll encourage us to cultivate a sense of inner peace and compassion
Yeah.
rather than feeding our egos or promising happiness through external means.
So it's about discerning between teachings that promote genuine spiritual growth
Yeah.
and those that simply reinforce our attachment to the world system. Wow, this deep dive is already giving me so much to think about.
too.
It feels like we've barely scratched the surface of this concept
Yeah.
and all its implications.
There's so much more to explore.
I'm really eager to hear more.
Yeah.
It's definitely a conversation that needs to continue.
For sure. As we kind of dig deeper into this whole idea of detachment,
Yeah.
I think it's important to address a common misconception.
Okay.
People often think that detachment means you become emotionless
I can see that.
or apathetic.
Yeah.
But it's not about suppressing our feelings or disconnecting from the world.
Right. It's not about being cold or indifferent.
No, it's quite the opposite, actually.
Oh.
Detachment actually allows us to experience our emotions more fully,
Really?
but without being ruled by them.
Okay.
So you can feel joy, sadness, anger, the whole range.
Mm-hmm.
But those emotions don't have to dictate your actions or cloud your judgment.
So it's more about creating space
Yeah.
between our emotions and how we react to them.
Exactly. It's about cultivating that inner stability that allows us to observe our emotions
Yeah.
without being swept away by them.
I like that.
Yeah.
It's like watching the waves crashing on the shore.
Right.
You can appreciate the power and the beauty of the waves,
Yeah,
but you don't have to get pulled into the undertow.
exactly.
That's great enough.
It makes me think about, the Stoic idea of focusing on what we can control.
Right.
Because we can't always control what happens to us,
Right.
but we can control how we respond.
Exactly. And that's where the power of choice comes in.
Okay.
And, remembering back to that quote from John where Jesus says, I have chosen you out of the world.
Yeah.
The article suggests that this isn't about predestination.
Okay.
Like some people are chosen and others aren't.
Right.
It's about a fundamental choice
Okay.
that we each have to make.
So it's not about being chosen, but about choosing.
Precisely.
We can choose to align ourselves with the world system, chasing after material possessions, external validation.
Yeah.
Or we can choose to align ourselves with a higher purpose, to seek something deeper and more meaningful.
It's like we're always being presented with that choice,
Yeah.
to stay in the cave and cling to the shadows
Right.
or to step out into the light of a different reality.
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
And that choice is available to us in every moment.
Wow.
It's about consciously choosing to shift our focus
Okay.
from the external to the internal,
Right.
from the material to the spiritual.
But, if we're trying to navigate this path
Yeah.
of being in the world but not of it,
Right.
how do we avoid getting misled?
Yeah, that's a good question.
The article talks about, the dangers of false prophets.
Right.
How can we discern
Yeah.
between genuine spiritual guidance
Mm-hmm.
and teachings that might lead us astray?
Well, discernment is crucial,
Yeah.
and it's not always easy, because as we mentioned earlier, false prophets often present themselves in really appealing ways.
Yeah, they can be very charismatic.
Exactly. They might promise quick fixes,
Oh, yeah.
material wealth, special status.
So it's not just about avoiding people who seem obviously shady or manipulative.
No, exactly. False prophets can be very subtle,
Okay.
and they might even be well-intentioned,
Okay.
but ultimately their teachings are rooted in ego and attachment.
Okay.
They reinforce the idea that happiness comes from outside ourselves.
So how do we protect ourselves from those misleading influences?
Well, the article emphasizes the importance of paying attention to the fruits of someone's teachings.
Okay.
Do they promote love, compassion and understanding?
Right.
Do they encourage us to connect with our inner selves, to cultivate a sense of peace?
Yeah.
Or do they just feed our egos
Right.
and perpetuate our attachment to material things?
So it's about looking beyond the surface.
Yeah.
Beyond the charisma or the popularity of a teacher or a leader, and really examining their message and its impact on our lives.
Exactly. And it's also important to remember that, genuine spiritual growth often involves challenges.
Okay.
It's not always a comfortable or easy path.
Yeah.
It requires us to confront our shadows,
Right.
to let go of limiting beliefs, to
Yeah.
step outside our comfort zones.
So it's not about finding a guru who will tell us what we want to hear,
Right.
but about finding teachers and teachings that will challenge us to grow and evolve.
Precisely. It's an ongoing process of self-discovery,
Yeah.
not a destination that we arrive at overnight.
Right.
And it requires a willingness to question, to reflect, and to do the inner work necessary for true transformation.
This conversation has been so insightful,
Yeah.
and it feels like we're just getting started.
It's
I'm
tough.
eager to hear what other gems the article holds.
Yeah.
Let's dive back in, as we're kind of wrapping up this deep dive
Yeah.
into this whole idea of being in the world, but not of it.
Oh.
I keep coming back to how it makes us rethink, our whole definition of success.
Right.
Because the world, it often tells us that success is all about material wealth,
Right.
status achievements.
Yeah.
But this article suggests that true success might be something else entirely.
It's a really profound shift in perspective,
It is.
The world tells us to strive for external validation,
Yeah.
to accumulate possessions.
Right, to climb that ladder.
Yeah. But what if it's actually about cultivating inner peace, wisdom, compassion?
It really makes you question all those metrics we use,
Mm-hmm. It does.
to measure our worth.
Yeah.
Maybe true success isn't about what we have
Right.
or what we achieve in the eyes of the world,
Mm.
but who we become
Yeah.
on a much deeper level.
Absolutely. And the article points out that this inward journey, this process of spiritual growth,
Yeah.
it's not always about feeling good or
Right.
having a blissful experience.
Yeah.
It can be challenging.
Yeah.
It can involve facing uncomfortable truths about ourselves,
Yeah.
confronting our own limitations.
So it's not about seeking some kind of constant state of happiness then,
No.
or avoiding difficult emotions.
It's not about that at all.
Okay.
True spiritual growth often involves, embracing the full spectrum of human experience,
That's
including the challenges and the pain.
So it's those challenges, those moments of
Yeah.
friction
Yeah.
that actually help us to grow.
That help us to shed our impurities and reveal our true essence.
And the article mentions that one of the most powerful tools for navigating those challenges is the practice of silence and solitude.
Exactly.
I've always struggled with that.
Really?
Yeah, my mind, it just races.
Yeah.
And I feel like I need to constantly be doing something.
I hear you, but it's not about escaping from the world
Okay.
or shutting down our thoughts.
Oh, yeah.
It's about creating that space for stillness,
Yeah.
for introspection, for connecting with our inner wisdom.
Oh.
In those moments of quiet contemplation,
Yeah.
we can begin to disentangle ourselves from all the noise and the distractions
Right.
and tap into that deeper source of peace and clarity.
So it's like hitting the pause button,
Yeah,
on the constant stream of everything coming at us
exactly.
and tuning into a different frequency.
Yeah, and from that place of inner stillness,
Okay.
we can then engage with the world in a more mindful and intentional way.
Yeah.
We can act from a place of greater wisdom and compassion rather than just reacting to everything that's happening around us.
This all ties back to that idea from the article, as inside, so outside.
Yeah.
If we want to see a more positive and meaningful world,
Mm-hmm.
we have to start by cultivating those qualities within ourselves.
Absolutely. It's a beautiful reminder that we are not separate from the world around us,
Yeah.
Our thoughts, our actions, our intentions,
Yeah.
they have a ripple effect.
They do.
By transforming ourselves,
Yeah.
we contribute to the transformation of the world.
This deep dive has been amazing.
It has.
We've explored so much from the teachings of Jesus to the wisdom of Eastern philosophy.
Yeah.
And it's incredible how these different traditions converge on this timeless idea,
I know, it's really powerful.
of being in the world, but not of it.
Yeah.
As we wrap up, I want to leave our listeners with a question
Okay.
to think about, if the world really is a reflection of our inner state,
Mm-hmm.
what changes can we make within ourselves
Yeah.
to create a more positive and meaningful external reality?
That's a great question for all of us to consider.
I want to thank you for joining us on this exploration.
Of course, it's been a pleasure.
And until next time, keep diving deep.